Yes. All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming back. We're going to start our second session. Do we want questions after each lecture or after the 3 lectures? Okay. Oh, let's see how it goes. The first talk in this session, Dr. Nili Broyer from the Center of Disability Studies, Taking Seats, Autoethnography of Accessible Buses in Chicago. Okay.
Hi, hello. So, is that is over? Okay, so I'm going first to talk about autoethnography very shortly. So firstly, I'm going to talk a bit about autoethnography, just to give some context about this methodology that I'm going to present. And then I'm going to dive into my case study of buses in Chicago, accessible buses in Chicago. Okay. So I'm going to read a short quote that give a definition to autoethnography. It is an approach to research and writing that seeks to describe and systematically analyze personal experience in order to understand cultural experience. So autoethnography is starting from the author, from the self, from the person that is experience life, and make it a starting point for a research. And the ethnography is trying to create a research that focus about a specific culture and examine it more reflectively. So it's creating a bridge that made the researcher not an outsider observer, but actually an active participant that involved in the situation, impact the situation, and experience it firsthand. In that sense, there is like several layers that become extremely involved and integrated in this methodology. It's starting from the self. It's continue with interpersonal experiences and interactions, going to a more macro level of society, offering a theory that can help us translate, give interpretation for the situation. And I suggest seeing culture as something that is covering everything, because also theory is coming out from our culture. It's not something that is ex-territory, if to return back to Ronnie's concept yesterday. It's the text and the theory and research is something that we are doing inside a specific culture. It's always mediated through culture and through language. So yeah, we just opened the phone again. So about doing autoethnography, there is a suggestion of how to approach the practice of it. So I'm going to read a short citation. I start with my personal life. I pay attention to my physical feelings, thoughts, and emotion. I use what's called systematic sociological introspection an emotional recall to try to understand an experience I've lived through. Then I write my experience as a story. By exploring particular life, I hope to understand a way of life. So we see again this bridge between the self, between the I, and the society at large. The process is, first of all, to connect to your experience and make notice of what happened in the situation, who was involved, how did you experience it physically, emotionally. Try to recall all of these elements and make them part of the story that you articulate and write as a starting point for research. Next slide, please. So autoethnography is a method that I prefer in my own writing, and I think it's a very important one also for disability studies, especially if the researchers are identified as disabled people and can give their perspective as such. The embodiment, the emotional, the small encounters that we are experiencing in life become a source to understand the macro levels of our culture and society. But I saw that there is a possible tension in my research that I'm going to present today. One of the researchers that refer to autoethnography suggests to see it as a method that is relevant to the research on culture. So again, I will read the citation. In autoethnography, a person is studying one's own culture and oneself as part of that culture. So the approach here is that autoethnography is more relevant as an insider of the culture. But I, in this research, actually suggest to change that perspective or to widen it, because in my study there is so much unknown, and there is a disorientation, because I'm studying here the buses, the experience of accessible buses in Chicago. So first of all, there is a different culture than my own in Chicago. I'm an Israeli. There is a foreign geography with new location and new people that I don't know. There is also a change in my physical appearance and in my mobility options. So as you see me now, I'm a short-stature woman that is mobilized through walking. But one of my other performativity is actually using wheelchair, motorized wheelchair, that is available for me during my daily life, and I decide when to take it out, when to use it, and when not to. But I have a car that I'm using since when I was 19. So for a very, very long time, this is my preferable mobility options. If to give us some context, Israel state give this priority for people with mobility disability to own their own car and transport to other locations through a personal car, and not through public transportation that were not accessible, and through the law become more accessible, but still have a lot of difficulties, especially when we're thinking about moving around from different cities and not staying in the boundaries of a specific one city. So in Chicago, I didn't have a car. I relied on the public transportation, and it became my preferable options. And that was totally new for me. Again, I almost never experienced buses in Israel. So the bus became the space that is new to me, that I'm starting to learn through this experience. And people know me through sitting on a wheelchair, motorized wheelchair. And again, because in Israel my performance is playing with that and not always being with the wheelchair. That was also a specific change because when I'm going out from the house in Chicago, I almost always took the wheelchair with me because going to the station itself was too much distance for me. Next slide. Going back to a recommendation to use maps, so I'm also using it here just to show how Chicago is oriented in the context of race. Chicago have a majority of black people that live in there, but it's a segregated geography. There are neighborhoods that have more population of black people, and other areas that have more white people living there. It's of course connected also to economy, right? The status of class is extremely connected and interconnected to race. And in the map you can see, I will try to show you exactly. So the blue area here on the east is white, more white. The majority of the people, the population is white there. And when we are going to the west, it's become more green, that is a black population. So I learned here, right? This is the UIC. And I lived on campus that is somewhere here, I think. But my school of disability studies were actually closer to the green area. So the bus I used was actually being used mostly by black people, and I was most of the time the only person that is white. So that became also a significant issue, especially when we are becoming aware of the history of public transportation and blacks. Yes, it's a very conflict history. Segregation was part of the transportation experience. People were expected not using the bus, or if you are black, or using it by going to the back of the bus. So there is an history that's going to play here also in my experience and narrative. So I will start with one of the posts I published on Facebook. Due to my experience there. So I'm going to read it. Ableism is embedded so deeply in cultural and social structures that law, chukim, can have only limited effect. It's going back to Mariela's lecture yesterday. I will try to illustrate this argument by a personal experience I have had here. The public buses in Chicago are accessible and equipped with ramps. This is a great benefit gained by law, which has direct influence on my daily life. However, I can still feel that the bus was designed primarily for able-bodied people. Although adjustments were made, the original design continued to shape disability and to reinforce power relation within it. For instance, when using a wheelchair, my body occupies a space of at least 2 or 3 seats, while other people, mostly black people, may remain with no seat. In some cases, they are also using an assistive technology and/or are elder. Although it is possible better than to have no place for me on the bus, I still refuse to see the current solution as equality or as a privilege. I wish to argue that the spatial treatment, it's both, treatment that I am receiving at others' expense is only necessary so long as we see the existing buses as the right ones. But for each one of us to be treated fairly, a fundamental change is needed. not an adjustment that relies on the existing structure already made for a fictional able-bodied person, but a new design made for a wide variety of actual living bodies. So in this narrative, I'm trying to articulate firstly for myself this puzzling situation of me trying to negotiate a space that is considered to be accessible. It have the ramps, I have a location for my wheelchair, but still I am fighting other people on this space. It's not granted for me. Somebody already sitting there, and they are actually most of the time also disabled people, but not using a wheelchair. So it's become like a struggle for myself to understand how it became that the accessibility turned to be such a problematic practice in actual practice. And here I'm like trying to find another solution to first of all to articulate the problem. It's not me as a problem for using a wheelchair. It's actually the structure that made this or them or me on this specific space of the priority seats. And I'm arguing that there is a need to find a different solution and create a different design. Next, please. Okay, so I will stop using my iPhone because it's all the time turned off, and I think I will just stand. So black skin, white mask is a very famous and known post-colonial text made by Frantz Fanon. It's an early writing of post-colonialism, and I'm going to read a very short narrative of his own of public transportation. In here it's actually the train. The body schema, attacked in several places, collapsed, giving way to an epidermal racial schema. In the train, it was a question of being aware of my body, no longer in the third person, but in a triple. In the train, instead of one seat, they left me 2 or 3. I was no longer enjoying myself. I was unable to discover the Favoris coordinates of the world. I existed in triple. I was taking up room. I approached the other, and the other, evasive, hostile, but not opaque, transparent and absent, and vanished, nausea. So he also, you can see, has a very specific style that include a specific scene that he is taking part of, but bringing also theory and also is emotional. And I think it's a very powerful writing. It became one of my personal inspirations of writing in autoethnography style. So when I'm reaching out to this text, I'm feeling identified with Fanon. He's talking about other people avoiding him, and giving him too much space. My experience is also taking too much space on the buses. I'm taking like 2, 3, sometimes even 4 other seats. And in that sense, it resonates. The stories resonates. But in other ways, we see so much differences between our narratives. And I want to have this tension between my own stories and Fanon's stories as a black person that experienced racism and avoidances in this public sphere. 5 דקות. Okay. So maybe I will go to the last one. את יכולה ללכת לנרטיב האחרון? 3? זהו. Okay. So yeah, I'm going... There is another narrative of a conflict with people that didn't stand up for me, and the driver asked them to stand because I need this space. But I'm going to read a different one. Today it's Halloween, and around noon, my caregiver and I are on our way grocery shopping in a nearby supermarket. It is a stormy and rainy day, and we are waiting at the station for the Roosevelt bus to come. When the bus finally arrives, the driver opened the ramp. He is a white man, probably in his 60s, with a gray masters, shafam. I get on the ramp, and my caregiver follow me in. The driver rebukes her for using the ramp and for not waiting until it was closed. I can hear them communicating about it. From the hail, I call out loud that she is with me. She checks with him what the problem is, and he prefer her to get on again after he closes the ramp. He is not pleased and replies that she is not supposed to get on the ramp in the first place. One of the priority seats benches is already folded, but the second vertical bench is not. An older black woman is sitting there on one of the priority seats. On the floor in front of her, she holds a large tattered suitcase with wheels. From the shape of her mouth, I suspect she is missing a few teeth. She continues to sit down, and the driver calls to her to get up. She does not react to his call, and it seems that she is reluctant to stand up. She looks away from me. In broken English, I request her to move for a moment so I can place myself, and then she can return to her seat. She gets up and moves to the side with her suitcase. I enter the location, making sure to leave enough space in the back so the woman can sit behind me. She returns and sits. From his seat, the driver looks at the mirror in our direction and again asks the woman to get up. She does not move. I do not understand what the problem is and say to the driver that it is okay. He repeats his call to the woman to stand up, but she refuses to comply. I am confused and feel uncomfortable. Again, I tell the driver that I don't need a space, that she can sit there. The driver gets upset. He angrily replies that she cannot sit there and that this bench has to be folded and that those are the CTA's regulation, החברה של האוטובוסים שם. He says to her, "Ma'am, you need to get up," and declares that until she does, the bus stay put. A man from the back of the bus yells for her to move and that it is taking too much time. I stop talking. The older black woman stands up and moves to the front of the bus. The bus moves again. The woman says something, but I cannot hear what it is. After one or two stops, I look in the woman's direction. She looks toward the back of the bus, but not directly at me. She moves her face to the door in front of her and then again to the back. With her right hand, she is presenting a thumb up. I'm looking at her hand, but do not know who she is communicating with. Now, with her hand turned again toward the door, she changes the gesture and raises the middle finger. Couple of stops later, the woman is getting off the bus, and as are my caregiver and I. My caregiver tells me that the woman on the bus repeatedly calls the driver a bastard. I tell her that I think she gave me the finger. So it's like a very specific situation that shows us how complicated and conflicted this space is, and the power relation also in this situation is so complicated. So the way that I try to explain it and connect it back to theory is to find the context of this space. So ostensibly, the current buses are racially neutral and equally accessible to everyone. Yes, in the declaration, it's a space that should contain us all, without relevant of our race, gender, disability, and such. It seems that that acts of resistance are mostly directed toward other powerless people who are already in a vulnerable position. So, in this situation, because there is a difference between the declaration and the practice, there is all the time this conflict between people that want to take this space together. But trying to resist is actually damaging other people on the bus. We are not fighting with the privileged people outside of the bus. Yes, there is a class issue, of course, with transportation. So it's only us that occupies this space and fighting against each other. So solidarity actually takes the form of splitting into camps and causes a separation between people who potentially could be allies. We become grouped against each other. It's not a place of solidarity at large, because we are fighting on seats. So I suggest that this is actually a microcosm of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism have the image of creating an accessible, neutral, racial neutral spaces. Everybody is invited. It's low cost also in this public transportation. But still we can see how class and race and ableism and other oppressions still continue to work in this space. So that was my way to try to explain how we turned out to be in such a conflicted situation in accessible buses in Chicago. Thank you so much.
Maybe just one question or two questions at the most. Just if you can also take the FM with you.
Thank you. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you, Nili. That was a really interesting presentation, and yeah, I could hear a lot of that, like the whole argument on buses and stuff about just room. Do you think that perhaps because of this lack of access, and because they tend to provide minimal accommodations for the most obvious impairments, like conditions like a wheelchair user, not necessarily a motorized wheelchair user, but that it creates like a hierarchy of disabilities and access? So, yeah, if you could build on that.
Yes, definitely. On the slides, sorry. No, okay. So this picture. There is a priority seats that refer to different people with disabilities, and there is like different symbols. Elderly people and people on a wheelchair is like as the icon of different disabled people, and it's supposed to be open for all disabled people and elderly people as equal, right? But in practice, there is a fight on this place, and the driver is the authority on the bus. He actually supposed to get other people raise and stand up when a wheelchair user is coming. So there is an hierarchy in that sense, because the structure creates this hierarchy, yes? Because I have only this option as a wheelchair user of two specific spots on the buses that it can be folded, the benches, and only there I can sit. So he is supposed to make it optional for wheelchair users, while other disabled people supposedly can find a different place. But sometimes there is no other place. And again, the racial issue here of taking other people going to the back because they are supposedly in a lower status, it's reflecting here so strongly.
Thank you. That was really good.
One final question, Kevin.
Thank you. Thank you, Nili, for this really thoughtful presentation, and I'm really interested in this autoethnography and like to hear more sometime. I'm curious if you were about your interactions with Black people with disabilities on the buses, and if you were able to do interviews or have conversations with them. And I'm especially curious if how being a white person impacted the way you said mostly it was Black people on these buses were interacting with you.
Yeah, there was definitely interactions some of the time. One of the narratives that I had here and didn't have the chance to read also involved interaction with elderly Black people with canes that argue that they are also have the authority and need to sit there. So this situation again repeated itself, that I was fighting for the same spot against them. But there was also other interactions or like small conversation. I don't remember them all because again, it's when you are not writing it down, you forget it very quickly. So I can only recall now something that I created as a spoken word, that a Black person that was sitting next to me asked me how much fit I am. And I didn't understand what he meant. So I like created an art text from it that trying to understand what he wanted from me and how we negotiate bodies and body size. So that was like very powerful interaction that like can supposedly be neutral, but it wasn't. It was very charged.
Thank you very much, Nili.